Hi, everybody. Welcome to this month's edition of Tech Talk. Going to have a little bit different format this time. I've got with me co-hosting, I've got Jeremy Austin of Artello and Networks, who are the manufacturers of the Preseem quality of service appliance product, whatever you want to call it. I guess depending on the version of it that you actually get. So Jeremy and I are going to talk about quality of service in related to signal to noise ratio, spectral efficiency, a little bit of bits per second per hertz, and we're going to go through just a little bit of information that I hope that you find interesting. It's sometimes when I present this kind of stuff, it's a little bit dry and a matter of fact, and so we're going to take a little bit different slant on it today, and we're going to just look at a couple things a little bit different here. So I hope you enjoy the next 45 minutes or so. And Jeremy, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the world a little bit about you? I'm sure that lots of the people that are connected right now have met you or know you from places, but there'll be some that won't. So looks like we've got more than 30 people online. So introduce yourself and let's kick this thing off.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I'm Jeremy Austin, and I'm currently with Preseem, most known to most of you as Preseem. Adderall Networks is the name of the company, and I'm not really going to talk a lot about that today. That's not really why I'm here. But I did, as a part of my my job as a senior product manager over at Preseem, it's to write blog articles that are helpful to the industry, to the RF industry. And so some of the content that we'll be talking about today is taken from a couple of recent blogs that I wrote this year. I'll put the links at the end. You're certainly welcome to check them out. They're not about Preseem specifically. They're about the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. So obviously, while you're over there, feel free to check out Preseem. And I'll talk a little bit about how I kind of went down this path of looking at RF from a system-wide perspective, not just specifically from a specific vendor or a specific product line. We get a lot of really useful stuff in these tech talks. I've been following Dave's tech talks since almost the beginning, I think. In fact, I met Dave in one of his training classes when I was learning about LTE, and that really set me down a path of learning the little bit that I know today. I really owe to Dave. So it won't be an echo chamber. We always have really fun discussions, and I'm going to pull up some slides that will kind of help guide that discussion. But we're gonna have just a real fireside chat conversation here. Okay, so yeah, I've been doing telecom for more than 23 years or so. And I think it was about 20 years ago that I started getting into fixed wireless as the cost of licensed microwave and unlicensed microwave began to come down. We started incorporating, essentially IP, internet technologies, into our telecommunications. Eventually, I ended up, after many years in kind of rural Alaska, which is where I'm from. I'm still in Alaska today. I'm in Anchorage now, and I just spent a few years at a tier 2, fairly large, publicly traded telecommunications carrier that covers all of Alaska and has optical fiber to the Pacific Northwest. And during my time there as a senior network engineer, I spent a lot of time with my focus on network monitoring, both on the wired side and on the wireless side. And that kind of steered me really neatly into what we do at Preseem, where we help WISPs, fixed wireless ISPs, measure, analyze, and improve their subscriber quality of experience. And that's all due to the power of monitoring. So I'm not going to talk about that a lot today, but the things that we're going to talk about are all, they're all essentially key performance indicators that feed into some part of the process of monitoring so that you can tell how your network is doing. It's one thing to have equipment from a vendor. It's another to actually deploy it in a way that you can get the most out of it. And that's partly what we're going to be talking about today. So we wanted to start out with talking about modulation levels themselves. We talk about it. Once you are familiar with the concept of RF modulation, we're usually familiar with the concept that a given kind of radio can operate either at a low speed or a high speed, depending on the characteristics of the signal that we're feeding it. And Dave has gone into some really advanced math on this. We're not really going to talk about the math. We're mostly going to talk about what that means from a physics and process perspective. And I actually asked Dave, about this because I was trying to represent this concept visually. If you're trying to explain to a non-technical person why high modulation is important, it's easy enough to say, okay, well, because it's faster. But how much faster and why is it faster? We can show, and in fact, I'm deliberately steering away from showing a constellation diagram, which actually shows the symbol, decoded on an oscilloscope. We're not doing that here. We're saying, okay, if we are taking a given payload, in this case, it's a text from a movie that may be familiar to anyone nerdy, where at the lowest modulation here at the bottom of the chart, if we're running at the lowest modulation, it only requires 3 decibels of signal to noise ratio, but it's going to take all of these time slots to transfer this message. If more SNR is available to us, we can kind of climb the chart here, and the same payload is going to take less and less time to transfer. So the efficiency, that's here in bits per hertz on the left-hand side, this is where it goes up pretty radically, pretty quickly. So we're starting out down at the bottom at half a bit per hertz of spectrum available to us. And then we get to 1 to 1.5, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, all the way on up to 7 or 8 bits per hertz. Now this is for a single chain, because I know we're talking about, there's some advanced radios coming down the pipe these days, which are in the tens of bits per hertz, in the 20s, 30s. I even remember seeing something from a vendor that is claiming that they are going to be able to do 50 bits per hertz.
Yeah.
Well, that's typically by multiplexing many different conversations together.
Yeah.
So in the context of this discussion, we're really talking about just one conversation at a time, one chain, one MIMO stream. We're not talking about dual polarity, any of these other things here. This is an example from a dual polarity 802.11 based system. That's why we're not going to talk about specific vendors. Really, the magic from one vendor to another is in how they create those multiple streams, how they multiplex them, how they beamform them. They're still all having to obey the same underlying laws. And we'll come back to this chart in a second, but first I wanted to take a quick digression to signal to noise ratio, where, for those of you who may not, have thought about it from a signal processing perspective, it really is like being able to read in the dark. It's difficult to do. So if we have good signal and low noise, we have a nice clean signal, we can read it very clearly. Let's say that we still have a high signal level, but the noise level is also high. That message gets obscured. It gets harder to read against, we don't have enough contrast against the dark. Similarly, if we have a weak signal, both of these on the left are going to be hard to read. The signal needs to be strong enough to start with. There are some signals that are very weak, but are designed to be able to be read, again, like that bottom line of the eye chart, where, it'd be the top line of the eye chart, the bottom line of my modulation scheme. I should have done it the other way around, so it would have matched the eye chart, where it's just much easier to read this bottom line here. We don't need a whole lot of contrast. We only need 3 dB of contrast to read this line. Dave, any comments about this before we go on?
So I like the fact that of this representation for a number of reasons. One of them is the fact that yes, this is a single stream. This is data that's being transmitted from someplace and being received somewhere else using the common modulation that we use today. Everything's quadrature amplitude modulation, and like Jeremy said, in the case of MIMO, now we're just going to stack these charts on top of each other. So if you think about this for a minute, if you're going to group transmissions together in multi-user MIMO, then people that are going to be in the MU group are going to have to be people that can read this same message at that same contrast level, if you like, or that same the same amount of time. We can't have somebody at BPSK and somebody at 64 QAM in the same MU MIMO group. They have to be the message lengths and the message formatting has to be the same. And then the same thing goes with multiple streams now. with multiple streams, we can have different CPE at different, or different conversations, I should say, at different modulation levels. But nevertheless, the bottom line here is that we is this business of packing as much information into the shortest amount of time as possible to make the system as efficient as possible. And as we go along here, you're going to see that this efficiency is everything. And I'm very, very happy to see some of the conversations on places like Cambium's knowledge base, where operators now are talking about, you know, not deploying a system unless they can hit 64 QAM or higher in their base level, their installation floor. Now, Jeremy knows I've been preaching this for a long, long time, and it's really nice to see that happening now, because people have to get the most out of their system. If they buy a system that's capable of, I don't know, 750 megabits, for example, then then there's no point in getting 50 megabits out of that 750 megabit system, because of the fact that we're going to run it at BPSK or QPSK, and instead of planning our network a little bit better and getting 20 dB of signal to noise ratio, not 3. So
yeah, that's 100% true, Dave. And I have some charts further on. We're going to talk about this even more, but that's absolutely critical. Like, the vendor spec sheet can tell you what it's capable of, but once that vendor hands that equipment to you, you're responsible for how you install it and how you maintain your network. I just can't stress that enough. I go into a lot more detail on that in the blog posts as well, because we see a lot of, we see WISPs all around the world, and we can actually tell the quality of their network by the signal levels that we're seeing, the modulations that we're seeing. We know that they have, there really is a difference between a WISP that will maintain high standards of installation, even independent of their terrain and their competitive environment, because everybody has different challenges to deal with. There certainly are external factors. So, essentially, when we are looking at this chart, you can very quickly see that the amount of airtime required drops dramatically as we are able to achieve these higher modulations here. These higher QAM levels that we talked about. This is the same information here expressed as QAM levels. So the other aspect of what you can achieve with modulation is that, due to the inverse square law, which I won't go into in great detail, but essentially it says that power decreases with the inverse square of the distance. That means that we can actually only achieve high modulations for a given combination of antennas and a given output power. Let's just talk about it in abstract terms. There's a very narrow window where we can achieve a higher modulation compared to the distance in which we can achieve a lower modulation. So the temptation would be, particularly when you're first starting out a WISP, to say, well, I can reach 5 miles with this radio. Well, yes, but can you reach it at a high modulation? Very unlikely. Without a high gain antenna, obviously you can increase the gain of your antennas with some trade-offs. When we look at it just from a Wi-Fi perspective, that's this chart on the left here, we can see, really the zone in which you can achieve these upper modulations is very small compared to the zone in which you can achieve, with 4 dB of SNR, you can get 1 megabit way out, but that's going to consume an awful lot of airtime that can't be used by somebody else. Similarly, in a fixed wireless deployment, just thinking about it from a statistics perspective, the amount of area that we're covering that can achieve MCS 9 is very tiny. It's like less than a tenth of the amount of area that we can cover at MCS 0 to 4, this way out here in the boonies, essentially. So you really are going to have to, there's always going to be a trade-off of how much distance you can cover versus how much capacity you can push through that antenna. Any comments about this, Dave?
No, absolutely. This pie graph, it represents subscribers of the same density from the tower site going out. It is critical that you pick the correct spot for the tower. Just think about this for a minute. If you had the tower sitting up on the edge of town and you were trying to reach across town, it might be that you're going to waste half or more of your modulation just to reach the subscribers that you want on the far side of town. It's imperative that you put your base stations in the middle of your subscribers so that you can take and maximize this the business here. Maybe MCS 6 in this particular example is where you want to take and set your installation floor so that I can have in this case 15 subscribers that are connected to my access point here, and then I'm going to take and adjust my antennas so that I'm going to put as little signal as possible out to the 11 and the 25 that we've got out there. The business plan is so tempting to reach that other 36 subscribers out there, but from a network performance perspective, we have to resist that. And you have to get to the point where you think about it. If I've got this site and I can reach 15 subscribers, maybe I can put another site over in my 25 subscriber area over there, and I can reach another 15 or 20 of those at a high level and build my service out that way. It's a bit of a different way of thinking about things compared to what we used to in the past. But we have systems like Terragraph, for example, the 60 gigahertz Terragraph, where it's going to force you to think about things in terms of micro areas, and in order to get the really high performance out of it, then this principle that Jeremy's talking about here is absolutely critical to understand and to accept, because once you do that, then you're putting equipment into its environment that it likes to operate in the best. You're not taking equipment and trying to make it work in an environment it was never designed for. And this
that's a great point, Dave.
This is one of the keys to having a successful network, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that's a good transition to the next slide, or the next couple of slides here, where we're going to talk about what is the cost of, I've definitely seen deployments where there really are, there's just a handful of subscribers. You go put up a cheap access point in order to be able to hit people that are a long way out. And we've all done this, I'm sure, where we've said, okay, I'm going to serve you, but you're only going to be able to be on my lowest plan or the next lowest plan. I can never give you the highest plan because there just simply isn't going to be enough airtime there. And often those customers are still grateful to have service, but that approach only works when you know that you will never be able to load that access point up with 20, 30, 40 subscribers. If you really are trying to serve a bunch of subscribers, you're going to run out of airtime if you don't maintain that modulation. So here's an example. What a subscriber actually uses from a total system load perspective is it's like the average of what they are consuming at the peak busy hour. Because we've all seen I didn't put this chart in here, but it's in the slide. Every day there's a peak in the evening and a lull in the early morning. So really we're building that network to be able to handle the peak in the evening. So that's really the only time that we care about from a congestion perspective. And at that time of day, you can measure a network by saying, take the total number of capacity, divide that by the number of subscribers, and you're going to get a number in megabits that is your peak busy hour load per subscriber. So let's say that peak busy hour load is typically today between like 2 and 4 megabits. We do see some outliers. I'm using a number of 4.8 megabits here because this is a number that we, in Preseem, we differentiate between active and inactive subscribers. So we tend to see that an active subscriber is using 4 to 5 megabits. And what that means is that there are other subscribers that are inactive. When we talk about peak busy hour load, we are counting all the subscribers, not just the active ones. So at that time, when a subscriber is using, the average of what a subscriber is going to use, if they're all the way down here at MCS 0, they have the ability to consume 64% of the airtime available on this fictional AP here, right? This 20 megahertz AP. And so when you take any given AP, there's going to be a mix of subscribers. So I gave a couple different scenarios here. If you've got really good subscribers here, or most of them are at your upper modulation, even at peak busy hour load, you're only consuming 76% of the airtime. But if you have a bunch of them being poor, say down in the mid modulations, MCS 4 or 5, or even with most people being good, but then one outlier the guy whom you said, okay, we'll install it, or you installed it and a tree grew up, then all of a sudden this one outlier can just knock that airtime up to where you have none available. People are going to be unhappy. It's just, you know, I can't stress it enough. This curve falls off really steeply as you go down your modulation level. The other thing to bear in mind about this, Dave, is that every day there is a physical change that happens throughout the day as the humidity and temperature rise and fall. And so if you look at the signal level, look at the SNR for a given connection, it is going to have a daily, it's almost like a sine wave. It's going to have a daily curve. That's normal. And if you install that customer and say, okay, well, I can hit MCS 5 when I installed it, and you installed it at the time of the day when that signal level was best, they might be falling down to MCS 1 or 2 every day, right? So, if you aren't paying attention to that, essentially the way that the RF characteristics are behaving across time, not just at one point in time, but across time, you're missing the whole picture of what can happen. Obviously, there are weather events that can knock it out. I'm not talking about those exceptional weather events. I'm just talking about the run-of-the-mill, the daily grind, right?
Everyday stuff. Absolutely, and that's why this margin is important. And one other thing that I want to point out here is that when we have a mix of subscribers on an access point, we do not want to have 100% utilization. That means that we're passing enough data now that when somebody else clicks their mouse somewhere in the system, or some other device wants a little bit of bandwidth, it's not available, and so the latency goes way up. So we have an issue with latency getting huge when we've got this business here of the poor or the good with the outliers out there, that we might be in a situation where we're 100% utilized, and there's no more room on there, and so that too leads to unhappy subscribers because they can't do what they need to do. I've got some examples in my past about this. When LTE was a pop, we had some people that were wanting to use 5 meg channels, and so they, during the peak SNR periods of the day, they could get 5 or 10 or 15 subscribers on, whatever, depending on the service rate. And then when busy hour came, those subscribers that were on there sometimes would randomly disconnect, or they would be unhappy at different moments until we took and set up some kind of method to limit how much capacity that they're using. And so manufacturers today call this proportional fair scheduling. And so in this proportional fair scheduling, people who are these outliers here will get less capacity, so that they're not going to use 32% of the capacity of the access point when they want to transmit. And so if I were buying service from Calgary ISP here where I live, and I was promised 25 megabits, and I find out that because I'm an outlier, I'm getting 1 megabit or 2 megabits, something like that, I would be very unhappy. So the best thing for a network operator to do is to protect yourself from that, and choose not to install that subscriber as an outlier, but work towards getting that subscriber into that the green area here, not in the red area here, and put them in the 8% or 5% utilization. And that's the way that we have to evolve the network. And so networks are never finished. Wireless networks for sure are never finished. They are only evolving.
And the consumption is always going to rise, which is the other reason that you really don't want to try to design your network to consume 100% of available airtime. Consumption will always rise, and you're going to be expanding, or if business goes well, you're going to be expanding, and you're going to be eventually upgrading, doing sector splits. New gear will be coming down the pike. It's just that's the natural the natural state of things. It's not like water or even power consumption's gone down as everybody switched to LED lights. We have yet to find an equivalent of LED lights for bandwidth. We did come up with better video codecs, but people still seem to find a way to consume more data.
They
So
do.
this is the last one, I think, here on SNR and efficiency, and it's a little bit it may be a little tricky to wrap your mind around. So let's just take a minute and look at it here. I ran this analysis myself because I had never found anybody else who had ever explained it to me in this way. And I said, there has to be a reason why, we really need to be able to hit a minimum MCS, minimum modulation, minimum SNR. And the explanation that I came up with that I think Dave agrees with, we'll talk about this here for a minute, is that due to the way that modulation schemes work and the SNR that's required, we're looking at a curve. We're not looking at a straight line. So let's take the blue line to start with. So this is showing us how much speed we're getting. So this is in megabits for a single chain at 20 hertz. So 20 megahertz.
Mm-hmm.
So 20 gig. So expand this by 2 for 40. Etc. By 4 for 80. And at BPSK, this is what we're capable of. Here's the SNR on the left. This is what's required, right? So we know that we really have to go up about 35, 36 dB in order to achieve 1024 QAM out here, this 150 megabit PHY layer at in a single chain. So if you look at this is a logarithmic scale. So, leaving aside the difficulties of translating the actual signal level to a linear distance, because that's a separate problem, right? It doesn't map neatly. But just purely looking at it from a gain perspective, we have essentially this upper part of the graph. Ignore this here. This is I'm not exactly sure how they're getting this data, but this is what the Wi-Fi Alliance is giving me. But here, we essentially have linear gains. So this is a log scale, but as we increase SNR, we essentially are increasing, which is a logarithmic scale, we are increasing throughput linearly. And below this value, there is a curve. I like to think of it as a cliff, really, where essentially you fall off a cliff here as you go south. Another way to look at it is this red line. So the red line is this is showing you how many decibels per bit per hertz you are achieving. So up here in the higher reaches, in order to achieve this, this is 5 decibel per bits per hertz, right? We're essentially getting our linear costs are dropping as we go down. So what this means is, as we add more SNR, the system does get more efficient. As we take SNR away, the system gets less efficient very dramatically. That's why this red line just drops upstream all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
So if what we're thinking is, I need to spend a certain amount, and that can be in terms of the hardware that you're using, that's the antenna gain, that is how close I am to my customer. Really, that's probably the biggest one from a network capital perspective, is distance to the customer.
Range, yeah.
Then, yeah, so from that perspective, this is essentially wasted money that you're spending here, because if you're down here at 16 QAM, you're spending twice as much per megabit, essentially, as you are for bandwidth that's above the 64 QAM need. Now, you could still spend more and get more, but the gains are more linear above that value. Below it, the losses are non-linear. It costs you a lot more. Is this making sense, Dave?
It is.
And one of the things that I tell everybody that I do any network planning for is that 100% coverage is very expensive. Might take 50 sites in an area to get 100% coverage, but 90% coverage or 80% coverage, you might do that with 5 sites. And so this is kind of the same principle, except that now we're talking about the performance of a single sector. So if I want to take and use every dB of system gain that I have in here, then I'm going to take and be up at that 10 dB per hertz all the time of what I need. I'm going to be running my modulation level really low, and I'm going to be taking my 150 megabit capable sector here, and I'm going to run it at 25 megabits, and I need to be happy with that if that's what I want to do. So what I always recommend, is that you have an installation floor. That when you go to connect a customer, that you never ever exceed your floor. Never go below it. There might be a basement there. Don't use it. Be above the floor. And so in that case, then I can take and have my 150 megabit access point pass 75 or 100 megabits actually quite easily. One thing that also I want to point out from this is that unless everybody's link is exceptionally good, you're not going to get 150 megabits out of a 150 megabit access point. The actual capacity of the access point, once you put it in a network, spec sheet says 150. In the network, you get 75 or 100. You get 2/3 or half or 3/4 of that spec capacity, and that's okay, because you need some margin. Anybody who I've ever done any RF teaching to, I talk about margin all the time, and you need to operate a system with some measure of margin in it. And this graph shows you what the relationship is between performance and modulation and effort. So the red line is really effort, and right. So at some point in time, you want things to be easy. Life's too short to have things to be difficult all the time. So you want things to be easy. So you plan for your network. Maybe you plan for this 150 meg sector to be 75 or 100 megs, 100 megs of capacity, and you call that good. And you make that a kind of a virtual line, a line that in your mind you say, I'm not going to cross that line. I'm going to do something else if I have to cross that line. And so it could mean that I don't have enough coverage if it's too high, or I don't have enough subscribers on there, or maybe I need to back the power down a little bit and make better use out of it. One of the things that's not here that's really difficult to demonstrate is the fact that in a system like this, if I am pushing my limit here and I'm driving up to the 8 or 8.5 dB per hertz level of effort in order to get out there, I'm causing interference out there too. So whatever's next in the band, whatever site is after this, I'm going to be influencing that site also, especially if they are also going to be trying for that 8 or 8.5 dB per hertz of effort into this. And so the closer that I get to the linear portion of both graphs, the less interference that I have. There's a phenomena called uplink noise rise. And by not doing the high effort installations, we reduce that uplink noise rise by a huge amount. And of course, one of the things today, now that we're doing Zoom and and everything else for virtual meetings and e-learning for the kids and all sorts of stuff, is that we need that uplink bandwidth. We need to have uplink that we know works. And so this is one of the ways to guarantee that is actually going to happen, is by having this margin in place. So that predicates the fact that we've got a good channel plan, we've got a good installation plan, and we have enough sites that we can cover the area that we need to cover.
Before we move on to the next slide, Dave, I just want to point out one more thing here. Greg was also asking us to kind of walk it through with a given example. So I'll show you 3 different examples on this graph, because as Dave said, this red line is really indicating effort. And sometimes that effort is going to be too expensive to reduce. So for example, if we look at something like a point-to-point licensed microwave shot, we can actually go, I mean, it's relatively easy these days over moderate distances to get equipment from Aviat and other vendors that will run at 4096 QAM, which I'm not even showing on the graph here, 40 something dB of SNR. And so your cost per bit per hertz is going to be very low. That red line is going to keep dropping. And the cost there is that you're going to be limited to these 2 high gain antennas. This is a point-to-point link, And so you're going to be, the trade-off there is you can't then take that signal and spread it around. In this environment here, we're primarily talking about point and multipoint, where you automatically have less system gain because your access point necessarily, in order to be able to spread that signal out to a bunch of users, that access point's antenna gain must be lower than a point-to-point link. And so that would be somewhere, if we think about it from a, say a 1024 QAM link, we're going to be up here in this cost area. And then let's take another example. Let's take something like a multi-user system like Cambium Medusa, where most of your cost is going to be down around here in this 64 QAM area. And then you're going to use a bunch of those to be able to push your actual total system throughput. We're going to be adding a bunch of chains on to another. I think you can effectively transmit to something like 7 different beams simultaneously, 7 by 2, so it's 14. And that's going to be kind of in the middle of this cost graph, where you say, okay, let's optimize the total system cost for how close we have to be to the customers, the antenna gain, how many we can hit, and that's this kind of a system. Then at the other extreme end, which is almost like a point-to-point system, is something like Starlink. We'll talk about that again in a minute. With Starlink, they're using a lot of spot beams, so very tiny beams from the origin, but it spreads out to about 15 kilometers on the surface of the Earth. So it gets to be pretty large, but from an angular perspective, it's a narrow beam. And those systems necessarily, because the distance here, the cost to actually come down this curve in gain is very high because those systems are 350 kilometers out. That means that all we can operate at are down in these low modulations, QPSK, BPSK. Those systems are not running in high modulations. Another example at the opposite end of the distance scale is Telegraph in 60 gigahertz, where we're running very low modulations. And what we do there to trade off to get more bandwidth is we run very wide channels. So we're taking this 20 megahertz and we're multiplying that by a factor of 100. And so we're doing a really wide channel at a low modulation. That's because we can't, in 60 gigahertz, given that it is attenuated by oxygen, we can't climb up this SNR scale very high, just due to the fact that the oxygen attenuates our signal. So we're having to sit down here at the low end of this chart. So both of those systems are examples of the same kind of principle, both Telegraph and Starlink, where they're running wide channels at a fairly low modulation.
Exactly.
And that takes us to this chart here, which is kind of an exploration of what's the theoretical total system capacity in a fixed wireless band. We don't have a ton of time to talk about it, but definitely go check it out on the blog later on if we don't get to answer all your questions. And of course, please continue to put your questions in the chat. If we looking at the red line is showing us spectral density. That is, how many hertz do we have per square meter? So if we think about, you could then convert that into how many hertz do I have per customer, because you would be able to know your customer density for a given area. This is kind of a chart that shows you what is the most appropriate tool to use for a given type of deployment, because it all comes down to population density. Telegraph, which is up here in the upper right, the blue line shows that we can really only reach a couple hundred meters. 187 for peak modulation. With some high gain antennas, some vendors have higher gain antennas, you can go further, but it's still hundreds of meters. It's not thousands of meters. And then, but the total system capacity is really high per square meter. So within that area, within that 200 meters, think of it as a 200 meter sector, whatever the shape of pick your vendor of choice, you're going to be able to pass really high speed plans to those users because this red line is through the roof. Down here in the 5 gigahertz range, I'm breaking out the 5.1 and 5.8 DFS in the midband, which does not reach as far, and then 6 gigahertz, which is coming. We can see that we have a lot more spectrum available per user. Again, this becomes a density equation. CBRS, we have considerably less spectrum available than we do in these bands, but we can also go a lot further due to the output power. The regulatory regime allows us to transmit further. That also, the further we go, though, of course, that lowers the red line too, to say, okay, well, now we're actually spreading that signal out to more people. So clearly, CBRS is a better tool when you can't get as close to the customer. You can beat through a little bit more foliage, pick your choice of where you want those losses to go. 2.4 likewise is hampered by, it goes reasonable distance, similar to 5, but it just has very little total system capacity. It's basically a tenth of what we have in 5 gigahertz, or less than that. By the time we add the 6 gigahertz band, is going to be about 3 times the spectrum that we have available today in high band for WISP. This is going to be huge for outdoor WISP operations. And then EBS and 900, I'm kind of grouping those together here down below the mark of what is kind of more common. EBS, that would be your 2.5 gigahertz stuff. That again goes a long way. I may be being conservative on that, depending on what year you're using. These are just kind of estimates here. And then again, but it's not a whole lot of spectrum. It's only 7.76 hertz per square meter. So the kind of plans that you're going to be able to offer, you're going to be able to cover a lot of area, but you're not going to be able to offer very big plans. Similarly, in TV white spaces, there's just a tiny, tiny amount of spectrum. It barely registers on here. You're able to go even further than that. I was seeing from some vendors that are claiming to be able to do very high density and really huge operations, but you're not going to be able to serve a very dense population with that. Any comments about this, Dave, before we move on to the last slide?
So I appreciate this graph being together like this, because quite often we don't get to see the effect of each band and why you would choose one or the other. Right now there's a big push in the US for EBS spectrum to be given away, because of course the fact it's not that well utilized, and the reason it's not that well utilized is what we see right here. So we can take and love the fact that you can see that we really have the 5 and 6 gigahertz band here now is going to be the workhorse for the next generation, I guess, of fixed wireless. Really is going to be here until technology drives us to somewhere else. But at the same time, with MU MIMO being advanced the way that it is, I think that we've got some legs here. I think that this 5 and 6 gigahertz space is actually going to be very valuable for a very long time.
It will, and again, I'm not drawing any conclusions about what hardware offerings are available in each band. For example, there are definitely bands that some hardware vendors are not operating in. So if you're really going to compare the total system capacity available to you, and in one band you have a system that can do 2x2 MIMO, in another band you have a system that can do 64-way MIMO, that's not apples to apples. You really have to run the math yourself on that to see, okay, is this a true comparison of offerings? But when we talk about the theoretical capacity, what can we really get out of all of these bands? These numbers are accurate because they're showing how far do you reach, and how much spectrum is actually available. Doesn't mean that you're going to be able to use it all in a given location. I think this helps, both to agree with your point, Dave, that 6 gigahertz is really going to be a workhorse band as well, whether you choose to burn that in point-to-point or point-to-multipoint. When we want to compare it with what is actually possible, I actually threw in this last slide to show this as well. Starlink is certainly something that WISPs are talking about all the time, wanting to know, how much of a threat is it, and certainly from the perspective that we do not yet know how much reuse there's going to be, how much spatial reuse and how much frequency reuse there's going to be in a given part of the world. We don't know what the total system capacity that they're going to have is, but we do know what their spectral capacity is. And again, that's down, it's less than a tenth of what is available to WISPs. The difference is that Starlink can reach 350,000 kilometers, right? Rather than this is an average of everything that WISPs are using under 6 gigahertz today. So what that means is there's going to be areas of low density where Starlink is always going to be a better option. It's going to be more cost effective. But there's that middle area where I really don't see WISPs being run out of the market because there won't be enough system capacity in Starlink.
No, and then with the 60 gig, the numbers here with the 60 gig mean that in small villages, for example, small towns, and that typically have been served with 5 gigahertz equipment now, we have an opportunity here to take the 60 gig system, and because the density in that town or that village is quite small, we're able to make use of that those 200 meter, 180 meter paths, and actually build a very robust network out of that. And I think that's that a hybrid of 5 gig and 60 gig is going to be the recipe for success in the future here. And of course, always fiber to the premise.
Right.
Is the
if I were to put fiber on this chart,
the crowning achievement.
Yeah, if I were to put fiber on this chart, you're going to have essentially infinite capacity, but then the distance is entirely just one of distance to dollars. So we'd have to actually plot this as how much does it cost you to reach the distance? Because if you look at this chart here, it's from left to right, very dense, medium density, and very low density.
Correct.
Fiber tends to fit on that left-hand side of the scale, where there has to be a certain number of passings per square mile, or it's impossible to pay for it. You know, with a reasonable ROI.
Yep.
So these are all available. I know Nicole's going to mention to the chat that this is being recorded and it will be available. And I also would point you to the source blogs for both of these. They go into a lot more detail on some of the stuff, like the more technical aspect of this. At preseem.com/blog, you'll find those there.
And I also recommend at the same place looking and reading the quarterly report. The quarterly report has got some really interesting information in it. I use it all the time, and it forms it helps form my opinion on many of the topics that I like to talk about. You know, it's one of the things Greg asked here about beamforming, and Jeremy answered about a range, but it in fact it moves us up the SNR scale is what beamforming actually does. And so beamforming will modify those curves a little bit that we see there, because it's going to increase the MCS by providing more isolation to other signals. That's really what it does. And so if we're at MCS 3, for example, with a particular system, if we beamform that system, we might go to MCS 4 or 5, and that change might take us out of the cliff and put us over back on the plane again, and so we're back in linear space. That's what beamforming does. And the quarterly report, interesting thing is that you see incredibly what the difference that Medusa makes compared to other technologies that are out there right now. And it's quite stark. It's and
we're going to see more of that type of effect, Dave, coming along, both with folks like Tirana, where they're achieving with relatively low SNR, they're achieving a lot of throughput. You know, I don't know the hard numbers, and I certainly don't pretend to understand the math of what they're doing, but I believe, and that it's going to be something along the lines of being relatively low down this cliff, but then doing a lot of spatial reuse.
Yeah. So
where you then, instead of just using a single chain, you're using many chains. That does appear to be a way to optimize. Like, the other thing about this curve is, like from a Terragraph perspective, we're using 2 gigahertz channels, really wide channels. The computational power of moving up this line here, this is also greater cost from a computational perspective as we rise up that blue line. So for us to go do higher order modulations might not be effective from a power consumption standpoint as we get into these wider channels. So same thing with you're already, like with Starlink, you're already drawing 180 watts for this beamforming base. Imagine what they were to do if we were to say, okay, well, let's try to hit, even in this case, because the SNR is only going to be what it is with the 350,000 kilometers in the way there, that free space path loss, we're going to have to be doing multiple spatial streams or multiple frequency streams. And again, that increases the complexity. So there's always a trade-off.
Mm-hmm. Always. Yeah, absolutely. This was really good. I really appreciate your perspective on this, Jeremy. This is absolutely fabulous. You and I are definitely on the same page about this network performance business for sure.
I think it's a real exciting time to be in this industry. I don't see it, it beleaguered. Like we're really seeing amazing stuff coming down from the hardware vendors, and you know, we're still working. And WISPA, for example, still working for us to get you know, keep the rules from being stacked against WISPs. But you know, we definitely like to support their efforts there as well. But there's just, you know, we have yet to tap the limits of what is achievable. We're nowhere near it. Both as computational power gets cheaper, we're going to still be seeing improvements. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of innovations we're going to see in that 6 gigahertz band, where now all of a sudden we've got these wide channels available to us. It's not just going to be, okay, we'll take the same old equipment. And I mean, we will immediately, we'll take the same equipment and do wider channels, but there's going to be even more stuff that we can do there.
Well, I'm really excited about, for example, about Wi-Fi 6, right? About 802.11ax, because all of a sudden now we're taking some of the big advantage of LTE and we're applying it to a wireless LAN or to an access network, and it's like you said, it's an exciting time now. I've been you know, I've been 40. This is my 42nd year in this business, and I'm just as excited about things today as I was back when I figured out the math of or was taught the math of Shannon's theorem and you know, the Shannon limit, the Nyquist theorem. Those kind of things that were exciting to me back in 1983 are happening today, and so it's a great time to. Hardware costs are coming down. It's fabulous. So. Yeah, Eldon says I'm showing my age. Well, I am. You can see a little bit right here. 62 is a fine time. That's all. Let me say that. So, very good.
Do we have any more questions?
We do have time for questions. So if there's anybody else that has that has anything they want to ask, we got a few minutes left. Jeremy's got another appointment at the top of the hour, but as long as we're here, and of course, if anybody has any questions after this and going over the recording or be available on MBSI's YouTube channel, please fire me off an email or send an email to marketing@mbsiwave.com, and we can certainly get you the facts and of course all the time give you all those sorts of opinions. So that's okay.
So Greg is asking if I can share the slides. Greg, all of these graphics are taken from the 2 blog posts that Nicole posted above. So you can find them all there. There's nothing new on this in this deck.
Yes, and there's also
along with the explanations.
And there's also and great information in the quarterly report as well. So there's really good graphics in there.
Yeah, brief correction. We have tended to get it out about yearly, and we didn't do one last spring, which is what we would have done. You know, we kind of were doing them just before the WISPA shows, and we didn't quite have time to do one in the spring. So we will be doing an updated one for the Vegas show or before the Vegas show, and with some updated yearly numbers on that. And it's called the Fixed Wireless Network Report. And yeah, it's become a really great resource for not just the wireless community itself, but also helping raise awareness, you know, outside the industry. It's being quoted by more people. They're really understanding that we see that it's really important to share the data that we have, that we can do so safely. You know, that there's no personal identifying information attached to it. It's just saying, what are operators actually achieving? What are users actually using? These are things that that, you know, both operators want to know when they're comparing equipment. Okay, I know it's going to cost me, you know, X thousand for this product and X plus 2,000 for this other product. Is that going to be worth it? Is that going to put me up the scale where I need to be? You know, optimizing a network deployment really is about finding the right solution for that specific deployment. It's not, you know, you really can't just take what somebody else has done as gospel because there are so many variables.
Exactly. Well, this has been, I knew that it would be fun, and yes, this has been a fun 50 minutes. And so, so thank you very much, Jeremy, for joining and sharing.
Thanks for having me, Dave, and thank you, Nicole, for moderating there as well. It's been a pleasure, and whenever Dave and I get a chance to talk, we'll talk for an hour. So that's a given.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, thanks very much, everybody, for joining, and have a great day. We'll see you next month.
Bye-bye.